Hello, welcome to Zigmatech Learning Hub. I'll be your instructor for biology. For this class, we are going to be taking our exercises from the ExamGuide app. Now, if you don't already have this installed in your device, I would like you to download the app in order to follow along in this class. Now, ExamGuide is a leading educational app that helps students prepare adequately for various exams. Exams such as the UTME, the post-UTME, WEAC, GCE, IJMB, KCPE, JUPEB, KCPE. In the junior sections, we also have the BECE, we have the SSCE, and so much more. Now, you can download the app from www.examguide.com or you visit the Google Play Store to download. Now, please subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell to update yourselves on new videos that will be coming up. Now, if you're ready for this class, let's get started. Today, we're going to be looking at classification of living things 2. Classification of living things 2. Now, there are several things you are expected to learn after this lesson. One of them is for you to be able to mention some characteristics of kingdom fungi, some phyla in kingdom fungi, and also some examples. Number 2 is you should be able to mention some characteristics of kingdom PLANTAE, some of their divisions, and also with some examples. Okay? If you could also remember, I think in our previous class, we talked about kingdoms. We said we have about 5 kingdoms. We talked about kingdom Monera, kingdom Protista. Today we're going to be looking at kingdom fungi and kingdom PLANTAE. Now, starting with the first one, kingdom fungi. Now, what are the characteristics of kingdom fungi? Now, we have about 7 characteristics to look at, but just flow with me as it goes. Number 1, they are unicellular organisms. Some, not all. Some are unicellular, some are multicellular. An example of a unicellular fungi is yeast. Yeast, it is a cell. It is unicellular. Then also we have multicellular, which is the mushroom. Mushrooms are multicellular fungi. Number 2, they are eukaryotic. If you could remember, we said eukaryotic organisms are organisms that have definite nucleus. Number 3, their cell walls are made up of chitin. Their cell walls are made up of chitin and not cellulose. Number 4, which is very vital, is that they are non-green plants. Kingdom fungi are non-green plants. Number 5 or number 5 rather, they do not have roots. They don't have roots. They do not have true roots, true stems, and true leaves. They have structures that looks like roots, they have structures that looks like stems, and they have structures that looks like leaves, but they are not the real thing. Is that okay? Now, also note, another characteristics of fungi is that some are parasitic while some are saprophytic. Parasitic in the sense that they feed or derive nutrients from other organisms, and saprophytic in the sense that they don't manufacture their own food. They derive nutrients from dead remains of plants and animals. So please take note. This is very important. Take note of it. I've seen several past questions where they ask, and the question is asked if fungi, they can manufacture their own food. No. Fungi, they are parasitic and saprophytic, not autotrophic. Please take note. Now, the next thing I want you to look at is some examples of fungi. Now, take a look at that. Now, we have the structure of a rhizopus. We have the structure of a rhizopus. We have other examples of fungi. We have yeast, we have mushrooms, we have mucor, we have bread mold, we have toadstool, we have mildew, etc. All these are examples of fungi. Now, talking about, that's a mushroom, and looking at their on the next one, which is called kingdom PLANTAE. Kingdom PLANTAE. Now, kingdom PLANTAE is actually the fourth kingdom in terms of evolutionary trend. Fourth kingdom. Now, the kingdom PLANTAE is divided into three main divisions. We have what we call the Thallophytes, we have what we call the Bryophytes, and we have what we call the TRACHEOPHYTES. I repeat, Thallophytes, Bryophytes, TRACHEOPHYTES. Now, let's start with each of them. First of all, we're going to be looking at the Thallophytes. What are the characteristics of Thallophytes? Number one, they are the simplest form of plants. Thallophytes are the simplest form of plants. Now, some are unicellular, while some are multicellular. An example of a unicellular thallophyte is called Chlamydomonas. Chlamydomonas is an example of a unicellular thallophyte. An example of a multicellular thallophyte is Spirogyra. Then the number three characteristics is that they are simple aquatic plants. They are simple aquatic plants. Number four is that they reproduce both sexually and asexually. An example is Spirogyra. Spirogyra reproduces sexually by conjugation and asexually by fragmentation. Number five, their cell walls are made up of cellulose. You can see the difference between plants, kingdom PLANTAE and kingdom fungi. Now, in kingdom fungi, we said their cell walls are made up of chitin. But in terms of thallophytes or probably plants, their cell walls are made up of cellulose. The next one, which is the last characteristic we're looking at for today, is that they do not have roots. They don't have roots. They don't have stems, and they do not have leaves. Please take note of this. They do not have stems. They do not have leaves. They do not have roots. Next, subdivisions under thallophytes. Subdivisions. Now, we have several subdivisions under thallophytes. We have what we call rhodophyta, chlorophyta, and phaeophyta. Now, rhodophyta simply means red algae. The chlorophyta talks about green algae, and the phaeophyta talks about the brown algae. An example of thallophytes, we have things like the volvox. We have the Chlamydomonas. Chlamydomonas can also be classified as a green algae. We also have the Spirogyra, which is a perfect example of a green algae. Let's take a look at the structure of a Spirogyra. You can see that it has what we call a spiral chloroplast. Those green things you see there, they are spiral chloroplast. The chloroplast of a Spirogyra is spiral. So that's how a Spirogyra looks like. Next is Bryophytes. Bryophytes. Now, Bryophytes, they are non-vascular plants. Look at the word non-vascular. Also, please take note that Thallophytes are also non-vascular. Now, what do we mean by vascular plants? Vascular plants are plants that have what we call phloem and xylem. They have phloem and xylem. Now, the function of the phloem in plants is to conduct manufactured food from the leaves to the roots and other parts of the plant. Then the xylem functions to carry out or conduct water and mineral salts from the roots to the leaves and stems and other parts of the plant. So any plant that does not have xylem and phloem are referred to as non-vascular plants. Any plants without xylem and phloem are referred to as non-vascular plants. Number two, they lack, that is bryophytes, they lack true roots, stems, and leaves. It simply means that they have structures that looks like roots, structures that looks like leaves, and structures that looks like stems, but they are not the real thing. Number three is that some are terrestrial while some are aquatic. Some are terrestrial while some are aquatic. You see, there is a shift from the aquatic to the terrestrial. In terms of thallophytes, they are all aquatic, simple aquatic plants. But in terms of bryophytes, some are aquatic, some are terrestrial. So there's a transition from aquatic habitat to a terrestrial habitat. Number 4 is that they exhibit sexual reproduction by spore formation, and by spore formation, and also sexual reproduction by gametes. That is, they produce asexually by spore formation and sexually by gametes. And finally, number 5, they are complex multicellular green plants. Complex multicellular green plants. Now, that is a structure of a bryophyte. That's a moss plant. There are two important examples of bryophyte. We have the moss and we have the liverwort. Moss and liverwort. That structure you see is the structure of a moss plant. Number 3 division, we have it as the tracheophytes. Tracheophytes. Now, there are 2 important things to take note of tracheophytes that is quite different from bryophytes. Tracheophytes are vascular plants. Tracheophytes are vascular plants. It means they possess xylem and it means they possess phloem. Tracheophytes also, they possess or they have true roots, stems, and leaves. They have true roots, stems, and leaves. Now, tracheophytes are also subdivided into 2 main subdivisions. They are divided into 2 main subdivisions. One, we have what we call the Pteridophytes, and then number 2, we have the Spermatophytes. I repeat, we have 2 subdivisions. Under tracheophytes, we have the Pteridophytes, and then we have the Spermatophytes. Please follow with me. Now, we're going to be talking more on Pteridophytes for now. Pteridophytes. There are several characteristics of a Pteridophyte. We have 4 of them. Number 1, Pteridophytes are non-flowering. That is, they do not possess flowers. Pteridophytes are non-flowering plants. And number 2 is that they are mainly terrestrial, while few are aquatic. You can still see the transition into a terrestrial habitat. So many are terrestrial, while few are aquatic. Number 3 is that they are non-seed producing plants. Now, all flowering plants produce seeds, but Pteridophytes, they do not have flowers, and so they do not produce what? Seeds. And number 3 or number 4, they reproduce by spore formation. They reproduce by spore formation. Now, let's take a look at the structure of a pteridophyte and some of their examples. An example, a major example of a pteridophyte is the fern. You must have seen this structure or this particular plant all around you. Most times, some persons use it as, I call it an ornamental plant to decorate their houses. So this is a fern. That is a fern. Other examples of pteridophytes, we have the Phelimas, we have the Dryopteris, and so many others. The next subdivision under tracheophytes is the Spermatophytes. Spermatophytes. Remember, we said that the tracheophytes, they are divided into 2 subdivisions. We have the Pteridophytes, which we have just finished discussing, and then we have the Spermatophytes. Now, take a look at some of the characteristics of the Spermatophytes and differentiate them with that of a Pteridophyte. Remember, when we talked about characteristics of a Pteridophytes, we said they are non-flowering. But in terms of Spermatophytes, they are flowering plants. That's number 1 in terms of Spermatophytes. Number 2, in terms of Spermatophytes, we said they are mainly terrestrial green plants. But in Pteridophytes, we said they are mainly terrestrial, but few are aquatic. But in this case, they are mainly terrestrial. You see a full transition. Number 3, we said in spermatophytes, they are seed-producing plants. But in pteridophytes, we said they are non-seed producing. Non-seed producing. From these characteristics, we can draw out differences between pteridophytes and spermatophytes. And then finally, the last characteristics of spermatophytes is that they reproduce sexually by fertilization. That is also another difference between spermatophytes and pteridophytes. Pteridophytes, they reproduce asexually by spore formation or by spores, but in terms of spermatophytes, they reproduce sexually by fertilization. Now, let's take a look at some things about some subdivisions in spermatophytes. Now, spermatophytes can also be broken down into other subdivisions. The 2 subdivisions we have under spermatophytes are gymnosperms and angiosperms. Gymnosperms, angiosperms. Now let's take a look at some of the characteristics of gymnosperms. We're going to be looking at two characteristics for gymnosperms and 2 characteristics for angiosperms, and we can also use this to differentiate between a gymnosperm and then an angiosperm. Now take a look at the first characteristics in gymnosperms. Number 1, they bear or produce naked seeds. Now, it doesn't mean that the seeds are not wearing clothes. It simply means that the seeds are not enveloped or covered with a fruit. Please listen to this. When a seed is not covered with a fruit, we say that seed is a naked seed. And how does a fruit come about? Fruits are simply developed ovaries. Listen, fruits simply means a developed or a mature and developed ovary. Fruits comes from the ovary of a flowering plant. Seeds come from the ovules of a flowering plant. So a seed can be defined as a mature and developed ovule, but a fruit can be defined as a mature and developed ovary. This is very important. Mature and developed ovary. I've seen a past question where they asked this. Please take note. When we say a seed is naked, it means it does not have a fruit or it does not have a developed ovary covering it. Number 2 characteristics is that their seeds are borne on cones. You'll see a kind of seed with spikes all around it. Let's take a look at it in the picture. Now, there are some examples of gymnosperms. We have pines. I believe some of you have seen a pine tree. The whistling pine tree is an example of a gymnosperm. We have the conifers, we have the cycads, and so on. Now, take a look at the structure. You can see the whistling pine tree as it is. You can also see the cones. You can see the cones. I believe you've seen that around you. These are cones, and the one on the right, they are the pine trees. Angiosperms. And remember, we said that the spermatophytes are divided into 2 subdivisions. We have gymnosperms, we have angiosperms. We've talked about several characteristics of a gymnosperm. Now we are looking at the characteristics of an angiosperm. Please compare the both of them. Now, number 1 for angiosperms is that they do not produce naked seeds. It simply means that their seeds are enclosed, or their seeds are enveloped, or you can say that their seeds are enclosed with a fruit or a developed ovary. Now, number 2 is that their seeds are enclosed in a fruit. That's still the same thing I was explaining. So we can draft out 2 major differences, or we can bring out 2 major differences between a gymnosperm and an angiosperm. Take a look at some examples or subdivisions of angiosperms. Angiosperms also are subdivided into the following: monocotyledonous plants and dicotyledonous plants. Monocotyledonous plants and dicotyledonous plants. Let's take a look at monocotyledonous plants. Monocotyledonous plants, they show certain characteristics. We have 4 of them. Now, take a look at number 1. They possess 1 seed leaf. Based on these characteristics, we can draw out 4 differences between monocotyledonous plants and dicotyledonous plants. Now, I said number 1 for monocotyledonous plant is that they possess one seed leaf, hence the name mono. Cotyledonous or cotyledon simply means seed leaf. Cotyledon means seed leaf. Mono talks about one, and that's why we said it possesses what? One seed leaf. Number 2 is that they have fibrous root system. They possess fibrous root system. Number 3 is that they do not undergo secondary growth. They do not undergo secondary growth. And the last one is that their leaves have parallel venation. And I'm going to show you what parallel venation is. Take a look at some of the examples of monocotyledonous plants. We have the maize, we have rice, we have oil palm trees, we have guinea grasses, and so on. These are examples of monocotyledonous plants. Now take a look at the structure there. That is a maize plant. If you check the leaves of a maize plant, you will see the veins in the leaves. They are parallel. They are all parallel. And that's why we said a monocotyledonous plant, one of their major characteristics is that they have parallel venation. Parallel venation. They have parallel venation. Dicotyledonous plants. Now, dicotyledonous plants, as the name implies, di, which means 2. Cotyledon, which simply means seed leaf. So we have several characteristics of dicotyledonous plant. Number 1 is that they possess 2 seed leaves. 2 seed leaves. Number 2 is that they have taproot system. If you could remember a monocotyledonous plant, we said they have 1 seed leaf. And the next thing we said, they have fibrous root system. But in dicotyledonous plant, they have taproot system. Number 3, dicotyledonous plants, they undergo secondary growth. But in monocotyledonous plant, they do not undergo secondary growth. No, they do not. And lastly, we said in dicotyledonous plant, or we're saying in dicotyledonous plant, they have net venation. Net venation. But in monocotyledonous plants, they have parallel venation. Let's look at some examples of dicotyledonous plants. We have the beans, we have granite, we have mango plant, we have orange plant, and so on. These are dicotyledonous plants. Now take a look at the structure of a mango plant. You can see the leaf of a mango plant. It is net venated. You can see the lines in the leaves. They are not parallel, but we call that a net venation. It means that one of the major characteristics of a dicotyledonous plant is that they have net venation, and then a monocotyledonous plant, they have parallel venation. Now, parts of a plant. We're still looking at the kingdom Plantae. A plant consists of several parts, but we're going to be looking at some of the important parts. We have the roots, as you can see in the structure there. We have a plant possesses a root. Well, we're going to also be looking at their functions. The plant possesses a root. The plant possesses a stem, and the plant possesses leaves as well as flowers. So these are 4 important parts of a plant. The fruits are produced by the flowers. So we have the 4 important parts of a plant. 1 is the roots. The second is the stem. The third is the leaves. And then the 4th is the flowers. Now let's take a look at some of their functions. Functions of the roots, functions of the stems, functions of the leaves, as well as functions of the flowers. Now, the roots. Now, the roots carry out several functions, but let's look at just these 3. 1, it holds the plant firmly in the soil. It holds the plant firmly in the soil. Number 2 is that it absorbs water and mineral salts from the soil. The root has what we call root hairs, and these root hairs penetrate deep into the soil as to absorb water and mineral salt. Number 3, the root also stores food in some plants. Like we have the yam plant. We call it a tuber plant or a tuber crop, because the roots store most of this food there. So in some plants, there are some plants that stores their food in the roots. Next is the stem. The stem. Now, the stem has also three functions we're going to be looking at today. It gives support to the plant. Number two, it helps to hold the leaves in position to receive sunlight. Remember that the leaves need sunlight to carry out photosynthesis. So it helps to position the leaves as to receive sunlight. Number three, it helps to conduct manufactured food from the leaves to the roots, and also to conduct water and dissolved minerals from the roots to the leaves. Okay, these are three important functions of the stem. The leaves also show three important functions. One, the leaves aid photosynthesis. They aid photosynthesis. Remember, we just talked about the stem. We said it holds it in position as to receive sunlight. So photosynthesis, or manufacturing of food, takes place in the leaves. Number two function is that the leaves aid in excretion. Removal of gaseous waste, removal of excess water is done through the leaves. Number three is that the leaves aid respiration. There is an opening which we call the stomatal opening in the leaves, which aids gaseous exchange in the leaves. And then finally, the flowers. The flowers carry out one most important function, and that function is that the flowers are responsible for reproduction in plants. Plants carrying out sexual reproduction is found in the flowers. Let's take a look at some questions as it relates to the exam guide based on these things we have just talked about. Kingdom Plantae, under classifications of living things. Now, if you go through this, we have about 11 questions, and we're going to be picking very few of them. Now, look at this. They said yeast is added to the dough during the preparation of bread because it produces. Remember, we talked about yeast as an example of kingdom fungi. It's an example of kingdom fungi. Now, the yeast during respiration, that is when several things are being produced. The yeast helps to break down complex carbohydrates and then give off several byproducts. One of the byproducts it gives out is ethanol, and also gives out carbon dioxide. But what actually makes the dough of a bread to rise is simply carbon dioxide. Then number two question, they said one important characteristics of green plants is what? The correct answer is autotrophic nutrition. Remember, we said anytime you see the word green, it simply means that that particular plant has what we call chlorophyll. And chlorophyll is one of the conditions necessary for photosynthesis to take place. And photosynthesis is one of the types of autotrophic nutrition. And that simply means ability of living organisms to manufacture their own food. Now look at question 3. They said, which of the following organisms exhibit extracellular digestion? Remember, I told you that fungi, kingdom fungi, one of their characteristics is that some of them are parasitic. That means they derive nutrients and live on other organisms as hosts. And number 2, we said they are saprophytic. It simply means they can't manufacture their own food. So they exhibit extracellular digestion. And all of this, green plants don't exhibit extracellular digestion. All these other options, B, C, and D, they are all plants. They are under kingdom Plantae. But A is the only kingdom fungi that we have there. Next, they said, which of the following is not true of rhizopus? Rhizopus is an example of fungi, rhizopus or mucor. Now, number 1, it manufactures its own food. That is the correct option. Rhizopus don't manufacture their own food. I repeat, kingdom fungi don't manufacture their own food. They are both saprophytic and what? Parasitic. They are not autotrophic. And finally, question 5, we said gymnosperms bear naked seeds. Why do they bear naked seeds? Because they lack what? Remember, I told you when they don't have seeds when we say they are naked, it simply means they are not enveloped with a fruit. And I told you a fruit simply means a developed ovary. So the correct answer to this question is A. Thank you for participating in today's class. You can practice more questions using your ExamGuide app. The app scores and gives a detailed explanation of all the questions at the end of your practice test. You can also learn particular topics of interest with different modes like study mode, mock mode, and even practice mode. It also has other features that makes learning very fun. Now, it is a must for all serious students. Download from www.examguide.com if you don't have it yet. See you in the next class. Don't forget to subscribe to our channels, hit the notification bell, and share the videos to your loved ones and friends that will benefit from it. Bye for now.